Greetings, everyone. Welcome to another round of our biannual Research Rumble. I am your host, Omri Koch, with the Black Researchers United Network. I am joined here today by two very distinguished gentlemen, very excellent scholars. Today we are exploring the topic, African participation and resistance in the time of slavery. This is a very contentious topic, and thus it requires that we dive into the research, that we explore the facts, that we examine what does the historical record say about this topic, and how can the answers to the questions that we have, how can we use this knowledge to help us in the present day? So, in the first round, last week, we addressed the question, did Africans sell other Africans into slavery? That was our question. At that time, we had Brother Adam Myrie with us. Today, we are joined by Brother Abba. And the question for today, round 2, is, did African people do enough to resist enslavement? Once again, the question is, did African people do enough to resist enslavement? So I'm going to go ahead and allow our brothers, Brother Myrie and Brother Abba, to introduce themselves. I just want you brothers to just go ahead and, talk a little bit about what it is that you do. Talk about, your background.
Recording in progress.
And, just talk about, how did you get started on this journey in research? And also, what really, what brought you to the point where you can really have a discussion on this subject? So I'm just going to go ahead and start with Brother Myrie. You did introduce yourself the last time that we spoke, but for those who were not present for the previous discussion, this would be for their benefit.
All right, well, for those who are unfamiliar with me, my name is Adam. I'm also known as Maafa. I'm the Chief Operations Officer of the Historical African Martial Arts Association. The association has a twofold mandate. The first is to catalog, restore, and spread the martial traditions of Africa and the diaspora where possible. The second part of the mandate is to study, assess, and share the information about Africa's military history, both on the continent and in its eastern and western diaspora. I have been practicing various martial traditions from North Africa, specifically Tahtib, which is Egyptian stick fighting, specifically modern Tahtib, and Maghreb, which is a stick fighting system from Algeria. And I'm currently in the process of working on a translation of a Mamluk text from 1470 known as Kitab al-Mas'un Jami al-Funun, which will be one of the few military manuals from medieval Africa translated completely to English. I also run a history TikTok, so if you ever want a chance to visit, it's at Myrie1. There I talk a little bit about, I do short stories about various events and people in African history, as well as a few funny skits here and there. Right now I'm at about 24,000 followers, just under that. Trying to get to 100K, so if you want to follow me and help me out, that would be great. But that is what I do.
All right, wonderful. This is great. I'm so excited, Brother Myrie. So, Brother Abba, I'm going to go ahead and give you the floor.
Well, firstly, thank you for having me on the show. It's wonderful when I can see, minds are being used and we're trying to understand and unravel history. So I'm really, really appreciative that you allowed me to be on the show. So I'm thanking you. My name is Abba Izadu Saba. My background is in anthropology and also Africana and Latino studies, and also religion. My focus generally is on Maroons and the historical background of how Maroons set their fortresses, encampments, towns, villages up within the Caribbean. Also, I'm also focused on studying how God impacts particular Maroon communities in terms of theology, and how that theology may be in syncretism with both African and Native American and Europeans' ideas and perspectives of God. I'm also a graphic artist. I also do portraits. I have a site called theoz.com. Indigenous.com is also a site where it's in the workings, but I'm trying to put it together so that we can have a robust discussion on Indigenous people and who and what are Indigenous people, and should we accept the definitions of what Indigenous people are today. Mm-hmm. Other than that, that's about it.
Wow, brother Abba, this is amazing. I am, again, both of you brothers, it's so good to have you here. So good that you could join us today for this very important discussion. I think that we are in good company, because, Brother Abba, I do see a stack of books there behind you, and that's always a good sign. That's a good indication. And Brother Myrie, we definitely did have a great conversation the last time. So I do want to just to explore briefly, what are some of the references that you brothers are going to be using today? What are some of the sources that you can point to which are, maybe great for people who are just starting to learn about this topic, where they can really help themselves gain a better understanding about the subject? Brother Myrie, I will start with you.
Okay. So to sort of prep for today's conversation, I looked up a few things on Sage Journals. I looked at the Insurance Journal, which talks about the history of things like insurance, which will be relevant to the conversation today. I looked up Henry Louis Gates's project with PBS, 100 Things to Learn About the Negro. He has a really great article about whether or not Africans resisted enough during slavery, which is perfect for today's chat. Mm-hmm. If people are looking for other bits of information, a lot of what I'll be discussing today is sort of pieces of things that I have learned over the years through my research. So sources that they can go to verify the things that I have said. They can check out Academia.edu, they can look at Google Scholar, they can also check out JSTOR, which has a lot of really great academically sourced articles for them to look at as well on this specific topic.
Awesome. This is wonderful. Brother Abba,
yes,
how about you? What are some of your reference materials or sources, just to kind of give our viewers an idea about where they can get started?
Yes, so like I said before, my focus is Caribbean, so we're talking about resistance as far as from my perspective, how resistance played out within the Caribbean and to a lesser extent Central America and Latin America. Yes. The book, the frame of references that I have are basically mainly done by people who studied Maroon history, and also books from Maroons themselves. Because one of the important things that we have to understand is that usually scholars will go into a community and they'll analyze and research that community, but they're not a part of the community. Wow. So you have to have people who are actually from the community to actually have their voice heard and also critically analyze the situation and dynamic that made their community manifest. Mm-hmm. So some of the books that I have is The Maroon Story by Bev Carey. I think she's an excellent author. She is wonderful. She is a Maroon herself. And this is like a major work from a person who is from an indigenous and tribal peoples. And you don't normally get that a lot from the actual people themselves to write books. Also have some general scholars, Richard Price, Maroon Society. He's definitely known in Maroon circles in terms of scholarship. I have also Kenneth Bilby, who wrote True Born Maroons. And he is a wonderful scholar himself. He's been around the island of Jamaica and other parts of the Caribbean. And also the wonderful Catherine Dunham. I don't know if you know Catherine Dunham, but she's a wonderful person who is also an ethnographer who documented a lot of the secret histories that took place within certain Maroon communities inside Jamaica, particularly the western half of the island. So those are some of the books that I'll be referring to in terms of understanding resistance within the Caribbean, mainly on the Jamaican island, and how that played out, how it impacted other places to also put together a model of resistance or inspired.
Wow. Wow, this is amazing. Some of these sources I have not heard before. Both Myrie and you, brother Abba, I'm just myself learning about a lot of this information. I've definitely studied this for a few years, but there's still so much to learn. So I'm so glad. I'm so appreciative of you taking the time to share with us some of the references, some of the materials that we can turn to, those of us who are just getting into this topic, just getting into this research, so that we too can get to the point where we have a greater understanding about the level of participation, the level of resistance that our ancestors really demonstrated during this very, very turbulent time in our history. So, again, thank you so much, both of you. I want to share some of my own references, some of the books you see here on the table. The last time that we did the debate, or rather the discussion, this is going to be more of a discussion than a debate. I do want to just make that clear from now. So the last time that we spoke, I did introduce a few books. This is a book called Great Rulers of the African Past by Lavinia Dobler and William A. Brown. There's another book here, The Destruction of Black Civilization by Chancellor Williams. This book, Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. Timeless classics. Capitalism and Slavery. There's another one by Eric Williams. Here is a book, The Half Has Never Been Told by Edward E. Baptist. This book is focused on the United States specifically. This one I think Brother Myrie will certainly love. It is called The Timbuktu Chronicles. This is a very interesting text, translated into English from the original Arabic. I have not yet explored this text, but I think it's a very important one for this discussion, and kind of relating to the previous discussion as well about where Africa was prior to the slave trades. This book, Civilizations of Africa, also a very, very good book. And there's another number of other books here. Here's a book, Converging on Cannibals. This book gives some insight into the wars that were taking place in Central Africa, especially in the western part of Central Africa, Angola, Congo. Here's another book, Transformations in Slavery. Subtitle is A History of Slavery in Africa by Paul E. Lovejoy. Another book here, White Slaves, African Masters. This gives us a certain perspective on the slave trades that we don't normally hear very much in the history texts. Another book, Recaptured Africans by Charles Fett. This book explores what was taking place on some of the slave ships as they traveled across the Atlantic, and especially as they traveled back. Because what a lot of people are not aware of is that there are certain times when the captured Africans were taken back to the continent. And so this gives some insight into that. Okay, so we're going to cut to a short break. When we return, we will get right into our discussion. Again, the topic is, did African people do enough to resist enslavement? You're here with us at our first biannual Research Rumble. Stay tuned.
Yes, sir.
For those of you who are joining us live on Facebook, or those of you who are watching us on YouTube, we are just coming back from our break. We are here at our first biannual Research Rumble. The topic for the day, it is African participation and resistance in the time of slavery. We are in our second round of our discussion, and the question for this round: did African people do enough to resist enslavement? Once again, the question is, did African people do enough to resist enslavement? Joining us today, we have Brother Adam Myrie of the Historical African Martial Arts Association, and we also have Brother Abba of indigens.org. Before the break, these very solid brothers, they shared some of their background on, who they are, some of the projects that they're working on. They also shared some of the references that they have been using to build their research into this very important topic. And so we are going to get right into our discussion. But right before we do, I am also going to share some of my own references. These are some books here I have on the table. As you can see, it's all over the place. So I'm going to start on this side. These are some books for us to read on this topic of resistance in the time of the slave trade. The first book here, it's called A Kick in the Belly by Stella Dadzey. Subtitle is Women, Slavery, and Resistance, the role that women played in the resistance struggles. This is a book which is essentially a translation of some of the thoughts of Toussaint's Louverture during the time of the Haitian Revolution. I have a number of other books here. This is a book here called Counter Life, Slavery After Resistance and Social Death by Christopher Freeberg. Essentially, this book talks about the subtle ways that the enslaved resisted. A lot of times we think about the rebellions, we think about, for example, the Haitian Revolution, and we don't necessarily think about the everyday instances of resistance. This is a very good book on that topic. Another book here is This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed. Now, this book talks specifically about the Civil Rights era, but it's still relevant in that it demonstrates how even after enslavement, we still had our own methods of resistance to oppression. Here's a book, Maroon Heritage. I believe Brother Abba might be familiar with this one.
Yes, sir.
Yes, have you heard about this book, Brother Abba?
Who's the author? I can't see it. The light is on it, so I can't really see.
Okay, so it's basically a volume that's edited by E. Kofi Agorsa.
Maroon Heritage by E. Kofi Agorsa.
E. Kofi Agorsa. The subheading, it says Archaeological, Ethnographic, and Historical Perspectives.
No, that's a new book for me. I've never heard that book. I'll have to get my hands on it.
Oh, okay. All right. So, just a few others here. another book here on the Haitian Revolution. It's called Facing Racial Revolution, Eyewitness Accounts of the Haitian Insurrection. So this is a very good one. It, unfortunately, a lot of the perspective is from the enslavers. However, there's still a lot that we can learn from this. And finally, I have these two books here. This book, on my left, your right, this book is called Caribbean Slave Revolts and the British Abolitionist Movement. This book basically talks about the resistance in the British colonies, mostly centered on the Caribbean, of course. And this book here, Disease, Resistance, and Lies, The Demise of the Transatlantic Slave Trade to Brazil and Cuba. It's another good book we can definitely explore on the subject. Okay. And so we're just going to go ahead and get right into this topic. I am going to just start with a question. I'm going to start with the main question, actually. Did African people do enough to resist enslavement? What can we say in response to that question? It seems to be a hot button topic, in the past year, or the past 2 years rather. In a lot of different ways, we have a society, especially here in the United States, where I'm based, and I think even the world at large has really come to the point where we have started to take a second look to really analyze this topic critically. We've had in recent times a series of very disturbing cases of examples of oppression here in the United States and abroad as well. We've seen a lot of these cases which involve the police, for example. And this has brought the issue on a global stage. And people have really started to look into what are the roots of these sort of systems of oppression? What are the roots of the inequalities that we have been witnessing in all these different countries around the world? And there is a very, very contentious book which has been released called 1619, which grew out of a project by the New York Times. And this book really addresses slavery. It talks about how the society that we are experiencing today, a lot of different aspects of our society are really sort of an outgrowth of the history of oppression, of disenfranchisement, in which you have the haves and the have-nots, right? You have some people who were, for the greater part of history, they were taken advantage of. And there were another group of people for a large part of that same history who, in some way, shape, or form, benefited from the processes which were taking place during that history. So as we discuss this topic, as we talk about history in general, it's important that we understand that this history continues to have an impact in this day and age, which is why we are here gathered today to discuss this topic about African participation and resistance in the time of slavery. So the question again, did African people do enough to resist enslavement? I'm just going to go ahead and open the floor. Whichever one of you brothers would like to answer that question, you can go ahead.
Brother Abba, please go first.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. So, did Africans do enough to resist? We're going to have to understand, we're going to have a definition of what is resistance, right? Like, how do we go about saying, hey, this is a resistance, and by this medium platform of resistance, we're going to get an end goal, which is some sort of idea of freedom or autonomy, right? Or independence. The tricky part that comes along with that is, definitions. When Brother Omri was talking about how in the United States we have certain issues and that still are connected to our past, we also have a lot of ideas of freedom, ideas of independence, ideas of individualism that only took place within like the 20th century, and some coming into the 21st century, which really have no bearings on what took place within the past, within the 17th century or the 18th century as such. So the worldview or your ultimate concern in how you want to actualize your well-being may be very, very different from what it was in the 20th century and the 21st century, in relation to the 17th, the 18th, and 19th century. So I'm saying that to say that, in particular, when you talk about maroons and resistance, if you're talking about localized resistance as being enough, I would say yes. But if you're talking about collective resistance, that is a shared idea of having independence that would probably transcend from island to island, from country to country, I would say no. Excuse me. Based on a lot of the body of the historical record, what you have is, from our perspective, because I am also a maroon from my mother's side, well, from our perspective, what we have is only what necessitates the moment. What we need for the moment is what we call a resistance and what we call a goal for that freedom. So, in other words, when we're resisting, we're not thinking about Haiti and trying to resist with Haiti. We're not thinking about, any other place, the Grenadines or any other, either the Greater Antilles or the Lesser Antilles. It will always be about, at the moment, what we're trying to do. So, for example, when in the 17th century, when you have the Spanish being attacked by the British on the island of HAMAA, which we call Jamaica today. Which we call Jamaica today. What you have with the resistance, African descended people is alongside African descended people, alongside Native American people and Native Caribbean people working together in order to exercise in order for them to the opposition, in order for them to have some sort of peace, a degree of peace. How do you go about defining that? How do you go about defining that? It only comes down to just being left alone, which is isolation what we call isolation for the most part. Because whenever they came into the cities, or the towns, rather, they would come in, raid, take things, so that they can add to their own subsistence and keep themselves going, keep themselves alive. And then in the process, also, those who are bondservants or slave or kidnapped individuals will also be free in the process. The dark side of that, though, however, is at particular points, whenever wars were won, the treaties after such wars were used as a way to manipulate those who were once enslaved or those who weren't enslaved. Some Africans weren't enslaved. And this caused these Africans to be used in a way to police their own people. Okay? Using a way to police their own people. Not all Africans were doing it. Not all African descended people were doing it, but there was a significant amount that were used to police the rest of the island. So when you talk about subsistence, needing for resources to survive, ideas of God, ideas of the use of weaponry. All these things play a part in how we're defining our existence. For example, when it comes to let's talk about theology. When you talk about theology, there's examples of where Maroons who were vicious and fierce against being in bondage with colonists, but would become more pacified because they did not have the subsistence and embraced the colonist idea of what is deity or what is the supreme being, and align themselves with those individuals, even against their brethren in other communities who shared a similar history with them. So theology plays a big part in why or how limited or how expanded we want to be when it comes to resistance. I would say that, taking the theology of your former enslavers would make your resistance less effective. And that was a part that took place with the effectiveness. Like, for example, there is a particular town on the western half of Jamaica called Compton, where in which you had some subsistence problems there. And they had the English missionaries come into the area, bringing food, but also bringing the Bibles, right? And that's the day that most of those Maroons got rid of all their African and native names and took on the Christian names, the European Christian names, as a way to say, hey, we are with you, we are conforming to your standards. And it was so powerful that they left a monument there to even mark the day or to commemorate the day that took place. The church in particular was the Presbyterian Church.
Right.
And that
was this in Jamaica?
Yes, this was in Jamaica. That's right. This is Jamaica. Mainly I'm speaking about Jamaica. So this is in the western half of Jamaica. HAMAA. And HAMAA is the native name of Yali. And basically, the successive wars that took place after that particular happenstance took place. That was during the first war. But later on, there was another conflict with the colonists that caused one party to another party to actually become the militia, black militia, to get the other communities outside of Jamaica. So that's when you have the diaspora coming out of Jamaica, going towards Canada, and then going towards Sierra Leone. And the resistance is not there simply because of the base ideology that is going on with the particular Maroons that I'm speaking about, which consists of a confusion when it comes to God and theology, a lack of, the main way we fought was guerrilla warfare. So we were very successful in guerrilla warfare, but to maintain it in a way that we can take over the entire island, that was never in our desire to do, which is to just take over the whole island.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, Brother Abba, yes, you're saying that there were some sort of divisions that were present, and you mentioned specifically religion was one of the things which not everyone was united on. And that's so right. That might have had some kind of impact on the strategies that were implemented, which would have allowed the African, our ancestors really to engage together in some kind of a effort of resistance.
Yes, that's right, indeed, because you would have some certain Maroons that would keep traditional African theology, in which you would have some influence from the Congo, some influence from Akan religion, mainly Ashanti, right? And some Taino Arawak spirituality as well. And these, in my view, where you have those communities, you find the most resistance from those because they're not conforming to the colonizers' ideas of a supreme being and what you owe to that supreme being.
Right.
So that plays a big part in how you resist.
Wow.
You know.
Wow. That is that's powerful, Brother Abba, to be able to learn these things. You know, that information is so essential. We have to understand. I think during this time, it's not like we have a monolith of people that we're talking about when we say, okay, the people, for example, on the island of Jamaica. These are people that came from so many different cultures, right? So many different backgrounds, and in some cases, they came from basically, completely different regions of the continent. Not everybody came from, the West Coast, right?
Right.
What would be today like Ghana, Senegal, Guinea, like not everyone came from those parts of the continent. Some of the African people, they came from, again, West Central Africa. Some of them came from the other side of the continent as well. And I think this is something that needs to be considered. And especially, as you pointed out, the beliefs that they had sometimes were radically different. The strategies of war, the culture, even the way that they communicate, right? The language. Had some kind of impact on how they could understand each other, how they can organize together as a people.
That's right.
And as you were talking about the fact that some enslaved African people were used against others, right? Sometimes they were used against each other. That brought to mind two books that I wanted to highlight here. This book here, this is a book that I was presenting in the last discussion. This book is called Slave Against Slave, and essentially it's a collection of instances in which enslaved people, for some reason or another, they committed certain acts of violence against each other. And so that is another dimension, I think, to the discussion we have to understand. Not everybody was united on the same lines of thinking. Sometimes you did have certain people that were, they weren't so much concerned about collective freedom so much as what can I do for myself? How can I escape this situation that I'm in? Another book that I wanted to highlight here really quickly. Oh, here it is. Yeah, this one here. This is called Social Control in Slave Plantation Societies. And so this book gets into, especially Haiti and Cuba, how the master class, or the planter class as they're called, how they implemented certain techniques to control the enslaved populations. Because you're talking about the Caribbean, you're dealing with a place in which sometimes the slaves outnumbered the masters and their families. I think about maybe 8 to 1 in certain places. So it's very important, I think, that we understand the dynamics of these societies, the politics, and the ways that they had been basically conditioned in some instances to interact with one another.
Yes, definitely. I agree with you. I think, you brought up some, during the Second Maroon War, there was only about at least 2,000 whites on the island compared to, I forgot the exact number, but it was more numerous than the whites. And the number of the white population just kept on dwindling as time went on. And in regard to what you were saying about, communities just wanting to isolate, when in the northeastern half of the island, there was they were called Malagasy people. Now they are the ones that came out of Madagascar, right? That comes inside Jamaica, and they have their own ideas of how to go about their thing. The same thing within the parish of St. Elizabeth with the Parati, from which my family comes from. Isolationists, we don't care about, we're just worried about us and our subsistence, and that's it. So there was no notion of this uniting polity or
Right.
national.
They didn't say, oh, we're all black, we're all African people,
exactly.
We all come from one continent, one place, let's just come together. That just simply wasn't the case, at least in that specific instance.
Indeed.
Hmm.
That's true. Yes. Wow. Really. So yeah, so like, again, when you want to talk about subsistence and ideas of theology, like I said before, that was another way to pacify population from resisting, right? Also, as well as separating themselves as a particular class that you just mentioned with Haiti, with the higher classes. You had that same dynamic in Jamaica with Maroons. Maroons were looked upon in a certain way, ironically, by whites. And the funny thing about it is they will praise Maroons on one hand, but when, Maroons didn't act the way they wanted them to act, then they were the worst of the worst. So it really just depends on when.
Right.
When it was convenient for them.
I see.
Yes.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much, Brother Abba, for sharing that with us. We're going to cut to a short break. And when we get back, we will pass the question to Brother Myrie. The question, once again, the question was, did African people do enough to resist enslavement? After which, we will take some questions from our viewers. So for those of you who are watching, you can leave your questions in the comment section, and we will address them at the next break. Stay tuned. Again, you are watching our Research Rumble. This is Black Researchers United, here with our guests Adam Myrie and Brother Abba.
Recording in progress.
Welcome back, everyone, to our first biannual Research Rumble. I am your host, Omri with Black Researchers United. We are having a discussion about African participation and resistance in the time of the slave trades. I am joined here with Brother Myrie of the Historical African Martial Arts Association and Brother Abba of Indigens.org. So the question we've been discussing, the main question is, did African people do enough to resist enslavement? I just have two questions that I would like to ask. Seeing as we did not have anyone in the chat submit any questions for our guests, I'm just going to ask the first question, which is, when we think about this history, when we do this kind of research, the question that comes to my mind is, how do we respond today to the same challenges that our ancestors faced during the time of the slave trades? We mentioned, for example, at some points, the inability to really unite what we needed to in those times of our greatest struggles. It did happen, but some would argue that it could have been more frequent. We could have done more. So my question is, how do we respond to those challenges today? Based on your observations, based on your research, what have you seen? So I guess we'll start with Brother Abba.
Okay. Well, I think when we look back in the past during the time of colonialism and what was happening, I think there's three main things that I think we should pay attention to. One is business and finance. Another is theology. And thirdly, education. And I really think about those in particular simply because those particular subjects really play a part in the disenfranchisement of post-slavery individuals, post-slavery bodies. And I'm saying that because within the dynamic of colonialism, there was hardly any Black entrepreneurship that actually turned out where you have a majority of land and people on that land actually thriving and making things happen and growing as any community would go, especially in relation to their white counterparts. Mm-hmm. And because that enslavement was shut down, the mandate, I believe, that we as people who are descendants of enslaved individuals, we should really rally together and increase education. Education is very important because during slavery times, literacy suppression was a big part of disenfranchising the slave, because it's not only physical chains, it's actually also mental chains. And I would argue that the mental chains are more powerful than the physical chains. So literacy has to increase, and not only just literacy, but plans, paradigms on how to combat ills that have been as a residue for people in generations post-slavery. Right. One other thing that also comes to mind is, again, theology. People's spirituality is a very personal thing, extremely personal. And from what I know, a lot of those in the African diaspora really are spiritual individuals. We don't have more atheists than we have people who are a part of some type of religion. Right. And if a religion is giving you your self-worth, your idea of identity in some form, and within it you have a particular deity that you call upon and you invoke, and you expect a return from your invocation, you would probably want to make sure that that deity is more aligned with the traditions and historical nuances and dynamics of the people that you come from.
Right.
If you have a theology that's coming from your enemies, and they're telling you, they're giving you a set of morals to say, well, this is good and this is bad, something must be wrong. Because if you're in a situation that you're perceiving as destitute and wrong and bad, then how can the ones who put you in that situation give you your paradigm of what is good and what is bad, right? So I think that, yeah, you gonna say something?
No, I was saying that's a good point.
Yeah, so, and what we've been doing is trying to intellectually, some people wouldn't probably put it that way, but we've been trying to intellectually challenge what they have given us through books of spirituality, particularly the Bible. You have different slave revolts where you have the leadership actually reinterpreting the context of the words of those stories to fit better the idea that they should be free, that they should resist, that they deserve some sort of blessing from that being as their slave masters.
Right.
And, I think about Minister Denmark VC.
Right.
Nat
Turner as well.
Nat Turner, that's right. It's a whole host of them that really looked at those scriptures and reinterpreted in the way I'll call it a guerrilla exegesis. I don't know. Exegesis is like a correct way of interpreting scripture that goes all the way back to the Catholic Church. Like their interpretation is the main interpretation, and if you don't like it, you're going to get your punishment if you don't follow it, right? So we started to challenge those various exegesis that came after the split from Martin Luther that gave us Calvinism and Anglicanism and all these different things when the Puritans and Pilgrims came over and other different splinter groups of Christianity took place. We started to challenge those things because the quote unquote slave did not have a blessing within the type of stories that they were given.
Right.
So you have the Nation of Islam is coming with their interpretation. Marcus Garvey and the UNIA would have their own Ethiopian Orthodox Christian interpretation, right? So we're evolving in a way to say, listen, we're not satisfied with the theology and the supreme being that we were normally given. We need a supreme being that's working for us.
I love it, Brother Abba. And that's very relevant even today.
Yes.
There's a book I've been reading, Breaking the Chains of Psychological Slavery by Naeem Akbar. He speaks to this, the importance of being able to, really to have some sense of self-determination, which is linked to an idea about the creator, that's linked to an idea about, your place in the universe. All of this is very much tied together, and the image that you see of the entity which is responsible for your freedom, right, for your liberation, for everything that kind of stems from that, that's basically a part of how you can be able to determine for yourselves in the physical world how you can progress as a society, as a people. So I love it, brother Abba. You brought up some very interesting points in regards to religion. I have a few books here I just wanted to share on that subject. African Culture by Molefe Kete Asante. He talks about the continuation of African culture in the diaspora, and also he talks about how the different cultures on the continent have certain interlaps. There's also here this book, The Rhythms of Black Folk, Race, Religion, and Pan-Africanism by John Michael Spencer. There's a book here, African Dance, an artistic, historical, and philosophical inquiry. So, these various ways that we have expressed ourselves over our period of our history, and even the ways that we, those forms that they take today. It's very important, I think, like you said, Brother Abba, that we get back into the roots, get back to the habit of really recognizing that heritage that has been denied to us. I think all of that's a part of how we can free ourselves today. So Brother Myrie, I'm going to pose the question to you as well. The question for you, Brother Myrie, what are some ways that we too can resist existing forms of oppression?
There's a lot of ways. I'm going to agree with Brother Abba that the first is knowledge. We need to have not just information, but good information, because not all information is knowledge.
That's right.
And so I think developing the skills to analyze the information that we are provided, and also to do the necessary self-analysis. And what I mean by that is, I find that a lot of movements today that are looking for social justice are unfortunately permeated by people who are using it as an opportunity to have power.
Yes.
As opposed to achieving the noble end of the actual movement. And so being able to look inwards and ask yourself if what you're looking for in this movement and what you are doing is about the power and the fame and the attention, or is it about actually achieving the thing that you are achieving?
Right.
I also think that we do need to decolonize the way that we approach our value systems. I was listening to a short video on sort of the history of Liberia and the conflict between the people who were living in Liberia and the returning people from the Americas, and how the people from the Americas essentially just replaced or basically just did the same type of colonization that their European masters did, because they didn't take the effort to decolonize and reintegrate with the people that are next to them. And so the first thing we need to do is separate ourselves from the sort of the colonial colonizer mentality that has permeated our culture. And we have to take an honest look at our value systems. And I mean, there are some things you can't throw everything out because you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. But remove the things that do not serve the goal that you are trying to achieve.
Yes.
Yes.
And with that, understanding that, looking inwards and decolonizing, understanding that we are not a monolith. The whole concept of Black people being a monolith or one thing is completely born out of colonization and the need to categorize and rank different groups of people. The person who is deciding what is and is not a Black person in the 1700s, no, it was the 1600s, probably never had a real conversation with a single Black person, or made an effort to properly understand Black culture or Black identity before deciding that all people from this area of the world are Black.
Yep.
That's right.
And then building a whole taxonomy based on that idea. So we need to strip ourselves of that and understand that while we are Black people, we are also Jamaicans, Nigerians, we are Ethiopians and Sudanese people and Congolese people, and look at our efforts as not a single unity, because we're all going to have different objectives, but as a collective. When the Berlin Conference happened in the late 19th century, they weren't sitting there and saying, we white people or we Europeans. They said, we English, we French, we Dutch, we German, we Spanish.
That's
we need to make a collective decision that benefits all of us so that we don't have another war.
Yeah. That's
And
right.
that is the type of mentality that I think we need to approach things with. That, me a Jamaican, you an American, you a Brazilian, while we come from different cultures, while we come from different mindsets and have different objectives, let's find a way to move forward in a way that helps all of us achieve eudaimonia.
Yes.
That would be my 2 cents.
Wow. That's powerful, Brother Myrie. I love it. I think that that was well said. From both of you, Brother Abba and Brother Myrie, these are the lessons that we can take from this history. And history, if we don't really analyze this history through a critical lens, we understand there's a saying that says history can very much repeat itself, right? And so, I think that we have sufficiently addressed the question, which is, did African people do enough to resist enslavement? For those of you who are watching, I hope that you gained a better understanding about this subject, and maybe just our discussions today have helped you to answer some of the questions that you have about African participation and resistance in the time of slavery. I will say that this discussion doesn't end here. We are, you're more than welcome to submit some questions to us, and we will certainly address them at another time. So are there any other thoughts, any final thoughts from our panelists today, from either Brother Myrie or Brother Abba? Do you brothers have any thoughts to share as we close this discussion?
Well, I just want to say that I was blessed by what you had to say, Brother Omri. I was definitely blessed by what Brother Adam had to say. What I always appreciate in a forum or a discussion is that I'm not only saying something, but I'm also learning in the process. And that's always a beautiful thing to me, because it keeps my mind active, and I always want to have my mind as active as possible. So I appreciate you both, and I thank you for letting me be a part of this discussion.
My sentiments are exactly the same. He said everything I said, or I was going to say, so I don't have anything else to add.
Oh boy, I love it. So for those of you who are joining us, once again, this is our first biannual Research Rumble. The subject for today, African participation and resistance in the time of slavery. Our main question was, did African people do enough to resist enslavement? We have questioned and we have answered. This is your host, Omri Koch, with Black Researchers United. Join us again next time as we address the question, how did traditional forms of servitude on the African continent compare with other forms that were practiced by people in other societies? You can always request to join us as a participant by sending an email to bru@afrologia.org, and just include a little background information about your reference materials and your familiarity with the subject, and we certainly will welcome your input. Thanks again for joining us. Thank you, Brother Myrie, and thank you, Brother Abba.
Thank you.
Until next time.